Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're going to be talking all about marketing and trying to get your finished product sold off the plan before it even exists, and some of the witchcraft that is actually required in order to convince people to actually buy stuff that doesn't exist. In order to do that, I've got a very special guest, Ellie Cashman from Ellie Cashman Designs. Is it Ellie Cashman Designs?
Ellie Cashman Consulting.
Ellie Cashman Consulting. My humble apologies. Marketing guru and genius, and been selling off the plan for a long period of time. Ellie, tell us all about you and your background experience, how long you've been doing this, and why we should be listening to you.
Thank you. Gosh, well, lovely intro. I've been in the property marketing space for the best part of 15 years. I started my career working for CBRE Residential Projects as a junior marketing coordinator, and that was a real baptism of fire, that I sort of discovered off the plan for the first time, something I wasn't really aware of before, that you could market something that doesn't exist and people would buy it. It seems crazy, but I started that back in 2010, and that was a lawless time. That was post a GFC, and there was a huge property boom on the horizon. So from there, I worked my way up and across various sectors, but I tend to stay in the development space and then off the plan space, working for developers like Coronation Property and Crown Group. And since the COVID-19 pandemic, I got made redundant and I went out on my own as a marketing consultant. I thought I'll just give this a go and test the waters, and that was 5 years ago this week. So
This
I'm
week,
very lucky.
happy birthday!
Thank you. So I love it, and then no day is the same, and it's lovely being able to work with across a bunch of different sectors, from working with architects to developers to project marketers to CGI studios to prop tech. So get to do it all, and no day is ever the same.
That's what makes things truly fun. So
yeah.
Now you mentioned that you didn't even think it was possible to be selling off the plan. What are some of the challenges that you actually come across when trying to sell a product off the plan?
Selling off the plan is a tricky one, because you're essentially asking somebody to buy something that doesn't exist yet, and there is nothing really physical to show them outside of maybe an architectural model. And property buyers, when they're buying off the plan, it tends to be like quite an emotional purchase for them. It's an emotion-driven purchase, and so they need to connect with your marketing on some level outside of just, this is my brochure and these are my floor plans. There's got to be an emotional connection. It can be a bit of a complicated beast, so I think it's important to have accurate visual representations of what the apartments are going to look like. They're called renders, CGIs, and they're sort of the bare minimum that you would need to do outside of your floor plans to really draw in buyers. They want to see what they're going to be buying, so they want to see the color scheme and the views and that kind of thing. So it's also important to sell an aspirational lifestyle, and that can be tricky when something doesn't exist. But the biggest one I would say is being able to budget accordingly. It's a huge challenge for developers. It's kind of having to know, what do I need to allocate spend-wise for the life of this project, and that sometimes can be 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So you sort of, that's a big challenge, I would say, for developers.
For the bigger projects. So I always liken it to the fact that they can't touch it, feel it, smell it, or otherwise. So we have to take them, I guess, into the imagination so they could actually imagine that they are there. So we're selling them the dream of what that's actually going to be looking like. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, it's a hard one, because marketing is not decoration. It needs to have some sort of a narrative behind it, and it needs to tell a story and connect with buyers. You've got to sell them more than, like I said, a floor plan. You've got to sell them a lifestyle and a future. And in order to do that, you've got to connect with them on an emotional level. And so it's got to be about a delicate balance between, these are the specs and here's the, the technical stuff that you need to know about a home that you will own, but also here's all the fun stuff, and here's here's the infrastructure that's going on, and this is the strata manager, and it's sort of a delicate balance between the two.
Yeah, people will tend to search on the product spec and go, hey, I want a 3-bedroom type apartment in this area, but they don't make decisions based on that. They make decisions on what's the lifestyle that I'm actually buying into, and what does this actually mean? How is my day-to-day going to be impacted by living here?
Exactly. I've got to connect with it on like with the story. You've got to connect with the narrative, and it's all about crafting a narrative that buyers can connect with, know.
So make it less about your specs, folks, and more about the lifestyle and the emotion that's sitting there.
More about storytelling.
So marketing manager, a lot of misconceptions as to what a marketing manager is. Why don't we touch on, firstly, what a marketing manager does, and then we can go, what do they not do? So tell us, firstly, what is a marketing manager?
Marketing manager is, essentially you're somebody that gets people interested in what your business has to offer. You understand what what your target market wants. You create a product that they love. You tell them in a way that's going to, grab their attention, that's going to appeal to them, and you help them, you guide them through to what should I buy. You help them make that purchasing decision. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around marketing managers being like content creators, being copywriters, being graphic designers, web developers. We're not. We're kind of the conductor of an orchestra, if you will. We're, fancy project managers a lot of the time. We are managing, 10 plus different suppliers in this sort of symphony of different channels and things going on to make sure it all comes together on time, on budget. It looks beautiful and it does the job. It generates leads. And that's all we can do. Once the leads are there and they're handed over to the sales team, once our work is done, there's still, a lot of sort of post inquiry work that is done. But that's the biggest misconception, is that we do a lot of stuff that we outsource. I'm not a web developer, sadly.
Well, the orchestra conductor is probably a really good explanation of it, to say, look, there are many, many people that are in the team, and they won't necessarily be working for Ellie. They'll be out external consultants and that sort of thing, but who to engage, I guess, what scope of work to actually give them, what the brief is. You're going to know that it actually fits, I guess, that core message that you're trying to get people to understand, and make sure that it fits cohesively in with everything else. So the website, the landing page, the graphics, the design, the copy, I guess all the brochureware, all the things that you're going to put together, that they all tell the same story. Yeah.
And I think good marketing's got to connect the right product or the right apartment to the right person at the right time. So everything's got to fall into place. So it can be a tricky one.
Yeah. And given that projects can take some time to actually run, there's different times where, I guess, a developer might be wanting to sell their project. So if they're selling off the plan, it's typically because either one, the financier has told them that's a condition of getting their finance, or two, they're trying to de-risk the project by having certainty in where the cash flow actually is before they actually pull the trigger themselves, especially on the really big projects. You don't want to get multiple millions of dollars into debt and then find out you didn't get a good market fit. So it's a good way of actually de-risking. So I guess, and given that, if we're starting to think about that, then the right time to actually engage is right at the start. So now, when we say right at the start, is that prior to I guess the development approval being approved, or is this once the DA is out and you're coming in at that point in the process? When is the best time to engage?
As early as possible. That's what I always like to say. It's not uncommon for developments to launch without a DA approved. That does happen quite a lot. But there's usually, they're fairly confident that it will be approved in the next sort of foreseeable future. So yes, get your marketing person involved at the very beginning, because there's all of that groundwork that has to go into it, and creating a marketing strategy, identifying your buyers, planning out your timeline, doing your budget, branding, even the naming of the project, all of that stuff early on, working out floor plans, briefing in CGIs, planning a full display suite can be a big one that takes a long time. So the earlier, the better for a marketing consultant.
So interesting that you mentioned branding. So branding is I guess, a super important part of this.
Yeah.
My lay interpretation of branding is that there's really three layers. So there's Rob the human, there's the company that Rob represents, and then there's the individual projects that might be delivering. The brand should be aligned all the way from start to finish. If Rob is a loose cannon and he's trying to represent a professional product and a high-end luxury build, those things aren't really going to align. So which layers of those three do you engage with?
I typically, work with the developer and on the project branding. A lot of the time, the developers that I see, they already have pretty substantial brand equity built up. That is, they have purchasers who are happy to buy their product at a premium because they have that brand equity. They know that I really like this developer. They're high end, they do luxury stuff, and that's who I want to buy with. So when it's that case, it's a lot, I would say, a little bit easier to then tell a story and create a narrative because they're already invested. Whereas when you're working with developers who maybe are new to the game and that don't have any brand equity, no one really knows them, it's got to be more about building credibility, but also brand awareness and reassuring buyers that, we do, unfortunately, there is a lot of, we get a bad rap, property developers. So there's a lot of mistrust and, particularly in light of recent events, there's concern that, there might be, build issues or structural things that come about, post-build. So in that instance, it's more about, creating trust in the brand and, making sure that a buyer feels comfortable.
Yeah, as developers, you're right. We do get a bad rap. We're seen to be, I guess, people that are cash hungry, raping and pillaging the earth, and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is that we're actually makers of community. Okay, it is property developers that actually understand what I guess the community is actually looking for and put the right product in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that, then nobody buys it. And I
Really?
wish that the community would actually see that. And if we go all the way back, I'm not quite sure exactly how old Australia is, 1788, I think, if I do the math. If we go all the way back then, we were a one-lot land subdivision. And so everything that's been created, every house, every school, every shopping centre, every playground has been a developer thinking about the community and what the community is actually looking for. And so when people start to go, not in my backyard, they forget that it was the developer that built their backyard.
Yeah, exactly.
And what they're trying to do is work out, well, what does the next person's backyard need to look like?
Yeah, there's so much planning that is involved with that. And, creating a community is not easy. There are a lot of great developers out there that, they go through full community consultation. They don't take this stuff lightly. And a lot of the time, they're in these huge land subdivision projects that go on for a decade or more. And that's a whole different beast. I don't deal too much with house and land and that kind of thing, but that is multi-staged marketing campaigns that go on for a long time, and they require a whole lot of thought and budget. So
yeah. Well, with our community, we're not yet at that stage. A lot of our guys are doing project number 1, project number 2, and you touched on when you've got no brand equity yet because it's your first project. What are some ways that they can actually bring some borrowed credibility into the project where they may not necessarily have runs on the board, but the consultants that they're working with might be able to bring that credibility to them?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. It's, you're borrowing credibility from other well-known consultants. So you might have a really experienced architect on the project, and you're going to rely on them really heavily across, your social media and all your digital They might have their own spread in your brochure on a page on the website. You really want to, borrow some credibility from them, and they've got a strong track record. Buyers know that, maybe you have not been around that long, but you are partnering with, the greatest architects to do it, interior designers, landscape architects, whatever it might be. But I see that a lot, borrowing credibility.
I see quite a bit where people just go architecturally designed, and you go, well, that's great, but which architects? Because
literally everything.
Well, some of them are good and some of them are bad, and some of them are just drafties. But if it's architecturally designed, at least they've gone to uni. That's a good start. But
Exactly.
obviously, understanding your particular area, and I guess the demographic of the area that you're in, you'll start to look for who are the project leaders in that area. What have they done previously that's going to give you, some of that kudos that you're actually trying to buy into?
The project leaders. I mean, you want to be working with, well-established architects. Even when it comes to like well-established creative agencies, you want to go with somebody who knows your buyer demographic. They understand the assignment. They understand what you're trying to do and your brand and how that's going to be positioned. That's a big one, is getting the suppliers right from the beginning. I think if you don't lock away the best possible team you have, it's only going to come unstuck later in the game. So it's so crucial to have a team that share the same vision as you when it comes to a project and believe in it. And so, I think that's a good one.
Yeah, a couple of minutes ago, we touched on being the makers of community. So as a developer, our job is to actually make sure that we're building the right stock for that community at that point in time. And so as a marketing manager, I would anticipate that you're trying to, buy into what is that buyer's persona, the buyer that's likely to buy that product. What are the things that you actually look for? And firstly, what are the different kinds of buyer personas that there might actually be out there?
Market research it's so important when it comes to marketing off the plan. You really need to know who you're talking to, and marketing managers get so granular with the detail. We create things called helix personas, which the detail on that is enormous. It's profiling, who is this buyer, what's their age, what's their gender, where do they live, what are their interests, where do they work, what have they been doing online, have they visited our website, can we retarget them across social media? So there's so many different touch points, and it's really sort of identifying who that market is. In terms of the demographics, I think there's usually 3 to 4, but the standard, across the board is a first home buyer, your owner occupier, wealthy downsizer, and your investor. They tend to be the 3 most common target markets in off the plan. And a lot of the time you can have, dual messaging. So you can have a similar strategy that kind of crosses over with your tone of voice and the way you're talking to them and your messaging. But sometimes they need to be totally different, because what an investor is looking for is not necessarily what a first home buyer cares about. So it just depends on the project.
Yeah, so there's also the ones that I can think of also would be young families and potentially people just wanting that luxury lifestyle. So whilst technically downsizer, but upsizing while they're downsizing at the same time.
Yeah.
Exactly. So once we've got our buyer persona, we understand who it is that that will be buying our finished product. How does that? You touched on, I think you said a helix that you try to do. How does that start to then inform and frame the messaging that you're actually going to be putting out?
Yeah, it's not uncommon for those helix personas and having a look at the target markets. So that sort of identifying that informs the decisions of the developer. So, for instance, we might sort of identify that there are, 2 and 3 bedders are performing really well. in this particular area, but we don't really see any point in doing 1-bedroom apartments because we just think they'll sit there and they'll be harder to shift and they're too small and it's just not what the buyers are after. So that's not uncommon for developers to completely change their product mix based on what the market is asking for. To adapt their floor plans based on what people are going to buy, which is smart, I think. And if you have the flexibility to do that early on in the piece before your DA is approved, I've even seen them go back and resubmit their DA, based on how things are performing. So it's very important identifying that target market and making sure your product mix is correct and will reflect what buyers are interested in.
Yeah, which is one of the, I guess, the strong reasons to actually engage early is to actually test to see whether, I guess, the product that you think is what they want is actually what they genuinely want.
Exactly.
If you're having to go back and relodge a DA, folks, it means that you've missed the mark the first time round. So
don't do that.
don't do that. Understand your demographic well. Now, I can't say that I've done a persona helix in the past, but that's something I'm now going to be researching, I can assure you. But I think I do a fairly thorough job on some of mine. So once we've mapped that out, I guess there's a few things for us to start to think about in putting together a marketing budget and a marketing timeline, those sorts of things. What are some of the elements that might go into a marketing campaign? Obviously, this is one of those things where not everything is in every project every single time, but what are some of the things we might be thinking about?
Yeah, definitely. It's fairly crucial to have render CGIs. When I say CGIs or render, they're interchangeable. They're the same thing. That's basically a visual representation of what the apartment will look like eventually. I would say in a minimum 6. It's not uncommon for developers to do 20 plus CGIs because there's so much ground to cover as well. There's various floor plates and floor plan types and typical apartments and views and various color schemes. There's loads of amenities you want to capture as well, several angles and viewpoints. So there's a lot that needs to be covered. So CGIs is sort of the bare minimum that you would need on top of floor plates and floor plans so that the buyer clearly understands this is what my apartment will look like tangibly. And then on top of that, then you start to look at the extras. So I would recommend, still in 2025, buyers want a brochure, whether that's a digital brochure that is emailed to them or that's a physical, tangible brochure that they collect from the sales suite. That's still a pretty non-negotiable. I think it's still fairly critical to have a physical display suite, but I understand that it's not always possible. Budgets don't always allow, and particularly in 2025, you really can't get away with doing a half-assed display suite. It's not uncommon to spend $500,000 to upwards of $1 million on a sales gallery. And I guess in terms of
so that replaces the old mood board, doesn't it? Just a piece of board that's got this is the carpet, this is the tile.
Here's a sales book. Here are some floor plans on the back of the exactly. People, a lot of buyers expect that if they're going to be dropping, $1.5 million on an apartment, they want to physically go to a display suite and see what is the kitchen going to look like, how is the bathroom represented, what are the finishes. I want to touch and feel them in person. I want to watch a project video. I want to look at the physical architectural model or look at a 3D model, which is a trend I'm seeing a lot more in clients who maybe don't have budget, don't have $1 million to throw out on a sales gallery. So instead they're investing, a far smaller portion of that into prop tech. So I work with the guys at Display Suite, and they do a lot of really cool stuff around 3D models, modeling out the whole building. So you can literally, on an iPad or on a huge immersion room wall or an LED wall, that's I've seen take the place of a physical model. And quite often, even a sales gallery, they will just have, an iPad with all of the plans and the plates, all of the CGIs, all of the different viewpoints, color schemes, integrated to their CRM system. So it's all updated stock in real time. But I think that's that's a big one that
So
developers
those
are.
ones that are like on an iPad or on a tablet,
Yeah,
or even at I guess a table, they are 3D but on a 2D
yeah,
surface.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you can also go the extra mile and actually then put the goggles on and actually be in a VR space,
Can.
and then you're walking around. Everyone around you sees you walking around like a zombie, but you're physically inside the room and actually looking around and seeing. And that gives people a genuine feel for, hey, what's it
Yeah,
actually going to be like to live here? So
exactly. Yeah,
obviously these things aren't cheap to implement. So it's got to be is it the right spend for the right project and that sort of thing. But they're all things to
exactly.
contemplate and consider, folks, I guess, as you start to scale your projects.
Yeah, exactly.
And so where they don't have the budget for a full VR or a 3D experience, when they downscale that, just little models that represent things, just simple things like that are, I guess, that's still a tangible thing that people actually can interact with, and it's all based on the budget that people have to actually and the size of their project. So clearly, if you're
Exactly.
only doing 3 or 4 dwellings, then you're clearly not going to put the same level of budget as somebody who's doing, 5 stories and maybe 20 apartments kind of thing. So
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
more knowing that these things are there and that as we scale as developers, we can scale into those things and know that, I guess, what it actually takes to do that.
Yeah.
Now,
That's one. Mm, sorry. There.
you touched on one of the more staple ones early in that conversation, which is I guess the rendered
Mhm.
images. So I'll just kind of give some tips and tricks to people doing renders out there, and I'm sure you can add to it as well. Um,
Mhm.
there's different kinds of renders, folks, and they have changed technology massively over the time. You can get very cartoony type ones, and you can get very photorealistic type ones.
Yeah.
The cartoony type ones are really good when you're doing your development application to get council to actually buy into the vision because they're relatively cheap to do.
Yeah.
Typically, your architect can do them on a budget. But when you want to do the photorealistic, that's when the devil is in the detail, and you want to make sure that your fixtures and fittings and the color schemes and all those sorts of things of what you're selling is actually what's represented in the image, right? And because that's the first time that you actually get to see what it is that you're selling to your clients. My encouragement is to get people to give you feedback on those images. And the images that you want are the ones that are going to invoke emotion. So the kitchen, the bathrooms, the master bedrooms, they are the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Perhaps the facade. And if you've got something that has a view, I would actually be doing that. Now, they can do some really clever things when you've actually got a view where they can take a drone to the exact height that
Yeah.
you're going to be, and they'll take a photo of the exact view that you're actually going to get, and they
Yeah.
stitch it together with a 3D rendered image. So it actually looks like you're sitting in your lounge looking out of your view at your sunset.
And it's
And
accurate.
it's
Yeah.
super photorealistic. Have I missed anything there, Ellie? Any other tips and tricks? What other emotional elements would you be throwing in there?
Yeah, styling is a big one. And a lot of these render studios will have a big library of furniture and styling that they use, but it's about, not doing the same kind of styling again and again. I think, like I've said it 1,000 times, like I'll scream if I see another Tom Ford coffee table book. There are just certain things that you see again and again. You're like, oh my God, why? And I think it's because a lot of these, developers sometimes they do skimp on renderers, as you said, and it's painfully obvious when you see like the styling choices and even the sky, the choice you make in the color of the sky, the time of day, if it's a soft dusk light or maybe it's crisp in the middle of the day, full sun, there's a bit of shadow. All of these things help build an emotional connection with the buyer. I've seen a huge rise, I will say, in offshore CGI render studios who, they might previously have worked in Australia, but I'm seeing a lot of developers, outsource that to offshore because it's substantially cheaper, but still looks very photorealistic and they're able to do it quickly and work overnight. When we're asleep, they're awake, type of thing. And so that's a big one I've seen in maybe the last couple of years since COVID.
Yeah, and if anyone is going to do that, it does make it a little bit cheaper to create. But my encouragement is to have, I guess, an onshore representative who actually understands, what the kind of products in Australia we actually get. So the Australian market, the US market, the UK market, the European market, the styling is very, very different. So you need to have somebody onshore who actually understands that, so they can actually guide that team really well.
So it's not uncommon as well to consult with your interior designer and get it, have them consult on the CGIs and make sure that they are accurate as to what will eventually be built. That's a big one.
Absolutely, and do not skimp on your interior design side of things. There's interior designs that are going to just help you pick colors, but there's also architectural level interior designs that will actually help you put together your kitchen cabinetry, your wardrobe cabinetry, that sort of thing. If you're trying to sell a luxury product, putting some thought and effort into where the drawers are and where the doors are and those sorts of things will make a massive difference in the saleability of your product at the end.
Definitely.
So given, I guess, there's a range of different things that we can actually engage in from a marketing perspective, what do you see as a bottom of the range and a top of the range budget that might actually go into, I guess your marketing campaign?
Gosh, bottom of the, I don't know if I mentioned before, but the budget typically is a percentage of your gross realization of your GR. So that can be, I've seen anywhere from 0.6%, which is tiny, to nearly 4-5% of your overall budget. So it really depends on the project. I've done $50,000 budgets and I've had, 20 million. So it can be a big disparity between what the developer is prepared to pay, the emphasis that they place on marketing, and whether they see value in that. But I would always say there is value in marketing.
If you're selling off the plan, I think you have to not skimp on, your marketing. It is what generates the sale, and the sale is what generates the revenue. So it's what do they say? Penny wise and pound poor, because it's very easy to save some money and not market well, but then you don't get the results you're looking for. Next up, Ellie, now that we know what our budget is, what are some of the marketing channels that we could actually consider sending our message down? So I know we're all familiar with things like realestate.com and that sort of thing, but what else can we do?
Yeah, a good marketing manager will usually have a good idea of what channels are going to work best in what area. Obviously, there's the portals, Domain and REA are your sort of baseline. You need to be doing just like project profiles or your listings. And then on top of that baseline, you really need to be investing in a big digital marketing spend. So that's, Google AdWords, SEO, social media is a big one. It's a necessary evil. If you had told me 10 years ago that social media would be one of the main lead drivers in campaigns now, I would have laughed at you, but here we are, 2025. So social is a big one to spend on. Signage, I see a lot of like out of home digital signage around the suburb within sort of a 10K radius works quite well. Even the old-fashioned letterbox drops, depending on the area, work quite well. And then there's the regular things like EDMs and newsletters that they always resonate well with subscribers, because people tend to be more invested and sort of pre-qualified if they're going to inquire about your project and sit on your database. You know what their interests are and what they're looking for, so they're already a little bit engaged as opposed to just going out cold to the market and seeing what sticks. So those would be the main ones I would suggest. But yeah, social is a huge one.
Yeah. So I guess Building a website, probably another one
Yeah.
that might not necessarily be needed for every single project, but be worthwhile. You touched on earlier on
Absolutely.
display suites
Yep.
and
Brochures.
brochures, that sort
Sales
of thing.
books are always a good one. Yeah. They're sort of the main ones that you want to be doing as a baseline in terms of collateral. And then, if you want to invest more, if you've got money, it's always wonderful to allocate some budget to prop tech, as I mentioned before, to a beautiful cinematic video is a big one, because video content tends to perform quite well, not just on the portals, but on social media. Video content is king. So I think it's definitely worth the investment doing a video and some animation to help sell things.
And you can do that also by working with your rendering studios. They can actually do a 3D video walkthrough of something that doesn't exist. So if you don't have some of the budget to do some of the other sides of things, that might be something worthy of looking at as well. So okay,
definitely display suites when there's not a big enough budget to do a display suite. That's a big thing we saw come out of COVID, was because everybody was locked down, we scrambled to try and find a way to keep marketing and selling these projects when nobody could leave the house. And VR walkthroughs was a big one that came out of the pandemic. So thank you, COVID.
Yeah, thank you. They also COVID was also helpful for QR codes actually becoming popular. They'd been something that existed forever, but nobody ever wanted to use them. Now you can't get rid of them.
Yeah, now I use it all the time on every piece of signage. It's because it's so easy. It's so simple to just scan a QR code rather than remembering a URL or a phone number. Forget about it.
Now you touched on social media, I guess being something that's kind of taken off. What are some of the things to think about from a social media perspective? Like, what platforms would you actually put it on? What does the kind of content look like? That sort of thing.
Social media is a huge one for off the land property. I think it's important to think about the tactics that work first and foremost. I think a lot of property professionals tend to get caught up on vanity metrics like likes and followers, but they don't actually equal qualified leads. So it's a tricky one, because I think you should never sort of chase followers or likes. You should instead be focusing on inquiries, and they're going to be super qualified because they've clicked through from an ad that you've shown. So I guess the first thing to note is what's organic content is free content that you post on your page yourself. That's organic content, and that should run as much like REA and Domain, as a baseline in your campaign that is constantly running and keeping them updated. And then on top of that, I always suggest to my clients, because I do a fair bit of social media these days, is to then look at doing paid spend, whether that's boosting your content or doing proper lead generation campaigns on Meta, on Facebook, and Instagram. Those tend to be, what works well. In terms of the channels you asked me, I find LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram tend to be the three most powerful lead generators for property. No surprises there. I mean, Facebook's been around for, the best part of 15 years, maybe longer. But it still continues to dominate, more so with the older demographics. You do find the inquiries tend to be from the older downsizers, because they're the ones that are spending the most time on Facebook these days. That's not to say that things might shift, but for now, I don't really do too much in the TikTok space. I don't really do that much around. We put our videos on YouTube, but it's more sort of a brand awareness support tool. That's not to say that TikTok might not change, in 10 years' time. And here we are now. I never thought that it would be such a big lead driver, Facebook and Instagram I'm referring to. But here we are. So, and high net worth people, buyers, they use social media, and they use TikTok. So, never know, I could be eating my words. But for now, I would say TikTok hasn't been working all that well. Maybe more of the podcast content. in terms of content, it's a nice kind of segue. There's usually sort of three types of posts that I see that drive engagement on social. And the first content pillar, fancy way of describing that, would be aspirational content. So that's the lifestyle, and like we talked about before, the kind of aspirational life that you want to convey to potential buyers. And that's, you know, everything from, you know, these are the luxurious finishes, these are our project partners, and look how beautiful this branding is, and these are incredible lifestyle shots. All that kind of thing is going to really create an emotional connection with them, and, you know, hopefully they go, this is the life I want to lead, I need to inquire. The next category is usually like educational content. I find that works quite well in educating buyers on things like, what's the walkability score of that suburb? What's the public transport like? Is there any infrastructure going on? Is there a new Western Sydney airport going? You know, that kind of content is pretty important. So that's your second content pillar, educational content. And then the third, I would say, is credibility. And that's a big one, because these, as I mentioned before, these developers are so diligent, and they are doing their homework and researching every aspect of you as a developer, your builder, your project partners. So a big part of having content on social media sometimes is not to generate leads and do the hard sell. It's more about that brand awareness and reiterating the fact that we're trustworthy. You know, this is the quality of our work. You can see that from these past projects. You can trust us, and it's, you know, trying to develop that brand equity. So, and then I guess like other content that works quite well on social would be behind the scenes. Buyers love that. Video content is, you know, outperforming everything else, particularly on Instagram. So whatever videos you can get, whether that's like walkthroughs of a display suite or construction updates, behind the scenes stuff, customer testimonials is always a big one. If you can get a customer to vouch for you and to verify that you are who you say you are, and you deliver beautiful quality apartments, and that's why I live here, and this is why I bought, that's really powerful. To have that kind of that buy-in from a purchaser is a super big one. What I guess in terms of aligning social to your project life cycle, you've obviously got, I think we spoke about before, you've got the teaser phase being your ROI phase, and that quite often can be quite introductory on social. That can be
the old coming soon.
Yeah, the old coming soon. You're curating a bit of a visual gallery. You're teasing the buyer with little tidbits of, here's what's to come. Here's a bit of the logo. Here's a sort of slightly obscured CGI. And then you move on to the launch phase, and that's when you can really start getting into the nitty gritty things like, you know, these are our price points, these are our floor plans, more detail oriented stuff. And then, but also creating a sense of FOMO, because you want to create as much interest as possible in the short time frame that you have, you know, before launch. You know, and then there's, you know, once the life cycle moves on and you're post launch, you know, it's got to be about marketing the apartments as they're under construction. Again, any construction milestones that might be happening, like a topping out, like a groundbreaking ceremony, right through to completion, to settlement. That's always a great one to get footage of. You know, giving out purchase gifts is always really nice content. Hey, so here's another happy buyer, and you've got that, you know, credibility there, and right through to completion. Sorry, we've done completion, settlement, right through to just selling that residual stock that quite often, you know, pesky. It's not uncommon to have 3 or 4 apartments left over that maybe are not, you know, that desirable. Maybe they've got a smaller floor plan or not less than ideal view, and that again, your strategy shifts to accommodate marketing those leftover apartments. But it's
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of terms in there that people might not have picked up on if they're not familiar with the process. So groundbreaking, that one's pretty obvious. That is, hey, we've put the first shovel into the ground. Okay,
Yes.
I've seen that and participated in ones where people will paint their shovels gold, and they'll take photos of people, digging their first sod. Sometimes they get politicians or high, influential type people to actually do the groundbreaking, just to try and get some product reach on that. And the other one you mentioned was topping out, and that is when, whilst the construction is still underway, it has actually reached the height or the finished product of the.
Point.
So there's lots of internals, fit outs, and windows to go on, and all sorts of things like that. But it has reached that point where you can go, I can now physically see what this thing is actually going to look like moving forward. And whilst there's a bit of a way to go, I guess the imagination and the juices start to flow.
Structure is taking shape. Yeah, it's always a great PR opportunity, if nothing else.
Yeah. So as they go through each one of those stages, I'm assuming that the messaging changes as they go through each phase. Still keeping to the brand, still keeping to the buyer's demographic and what they're actually trying to look for. But what are some of the, I guess, subtleties that you might see between the first stage, maybe, or the early stages coming soon, and the final stages where the project's close to completion?
Yeah, I mean, when it's pre-construction, there's obviously going to be a display suite. There's going to be register now. Help get in quick. Get your, you've got to create a sense of urgency. Inquire now, because it's to get your first choice. Demand is high. If you don't inquire now, you're going to lose the opportunity. It's all about creating that FOMO. And then as the project goes on and it's complete, the messaging changes to be more, or maybe it's not complete yet, but it's come down to the finished display apartment, and see what a physical display apartment will actually look like within the building. It's not uncommon for developers to fast track one apartment and have that used as a physical display suite within the building to help get those final sales away. And then once it's complete,
well, that's usually because you had to get rid of the physical one that was out the front in the demountable, because there's no room left on site.
Exactly. Or your lease is up at the nearby shop down the road. Then post launch, the messaging changes again, and it's more, this is your last chance to secure an apartment. Come down and see our completed stock, ready to move in now. That's when they start usually offering incentives of some description, whether that's free upgrades or curtains. I've heard stamp duty, we'll pay your stamp duty, lots of exemptions and rebates. So the messaging is constantly evolving, but it's always staying true to the project brand.
Very good. So that was quite an educational piece in the marketing life cycle. So thank you, Ellie. In wrapping this up, what would be some final tips and tricks for people, I guess, in wanting to think about trying to sell off the plan? What are some insights you'd say, make sure you do this?
I would say selling's more than a floor plan. You're selling a lifestyle and a future. So crafting a narrative that buyers connect with is really important. Humans are wired for narratives, not specs. I think that's always a tip I try to remember. And I guess another one would be creating FOMO. I think by the time you launch, you want your buyers to feel like they've been waiting for this for so long. The demand is high. So I think that's always important to remember. You want them to be chomping at the bit when it comes time to launch. And the last one I would say would be, I think I said it before, but you don't need to do every single marketing avenue and every marketing channel. You just need to do the right things. You need to do them well and consistently and with clarity, with a clear vision of and a clear strategy of who you want to be talking to.
And clearly that means planning ahead, talking to someone like yourself, getting those core messaging pillars right, understanding what your budget is very, very early on in the piece. Folks, I'd say if you're needing to sell off the plan in any way, shape or form, I would be having those conversations right at the start. While even when you've got conceptual floor plans, just to go, what do we need to do to map out this journey to get these things? But scarcity always sells, and emotion always sells. So what is the emotion you're tapping into, folks? Thank you very much, Ellie. Very educational. Appreciate you doing that. We have Ellie and other, I guess, industry experts come and not only present on our Sunday sessions, but we also have them come and talk at our meetups that we run all the way around the country. We run them in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, and soon we'll be running those in Perth. So if you would like to see, I guess, experience that, industry experts and also members of our community sharing real deals. So it's a great place to connect with people and learn from projects that others have done. Ellie, thank you very much for your time today and for appreciating. I'm going to say, hope to see you at one of our meetups. Till then, bye for now.
Thanks.
Bye.